It happened. I was by myself. I drug her from the bedroom. Tied her up, choked her, whatever, drug her in the bedroom, made sure she's drowned in the bathtub, drug her to the house, out in the garage, and stuck her a 55-gallon oil drum, stood it up, put the lid on, put that ring on it, tightened it with a wrench.
It's definitely a sense of betrayal to realize the one person that you trusted the most in the world is the one person that would hurt you the most as well. I do feel like if my dad would answer the details surrounding that it may provide me with some closure and clarity on the situation.
I've been locked up almost 18 years, and I'm just getting started.
Microphone interview. Take one. Mark.
So what did you do?
I don't exactly remember.
I think you do.
I think I don't.
So there's a lot of victims, a lot of your victims out there?
Oh, yeah.
Well, tell me about that. That's interesting.
Tell you about what? I'm not trying to ride the lightning, kid.
I want to know the details. Michelle wants to know the details.
This picture has me as an infant and my mom and dad. My mom's name was Martha Perry. She preferred to go by Marty. If I were to summarize to a single word what this picture makes me feel, lies would be the best representation. Everything had changed in the course of 8 years, from this happy and smiling photo to absolute chaos. It's difficult for me to really describe because I have a condition called alexithymia, which is difficulty recognizing or feeling emotions. It's a part of the trauma response from PTSD and the murders. There are two different versions of him in my head. This one is Michael Fote, my dad. This was the dad that took me everywhere, and for me, the sun rose and set on his rear end. The other version is Michael Fote, the killer. I have never admitted that I see my dad in two full versions, because if I acknowledged how I feel about it every day, I would be a wreck every day, to be honest with you. I remember always caring very much about my mom. I do remember a time when I was young and we went and laid on a blanket in the yard. It was blue sky with just a little bit of clouds. We were just out there sunning, and I was the happy as a clam just sitting there with my mom. It was a very small fragment of my life that I had her. I remember a lot of arguments, being asked to leave the room.
Have a big mouth is bad for your health.
I'm not going to be lectured by you.
A lot of fear. It was mostly just them yelling back and forth, and then my dad chasing my mother.
Keep it up! See what happens!
I could describe their relationship from what I remember mostly as toxic. There was a day that my grandma asked me to get the mail. She'd asked me to wait until she was home to give it to her. I went and got the mail. My grandpa asked me to hand him the mail. I said, no. Mama asked me to hold on to the mail for her. He got loud, started yelling, and said, you're gonna give me the goddamn mail.
You want to be smart, huh? Cut it out. I'm warning you.
And he smacked me so hard on my leg that I had a welted, completely raised, perfect shaped handprint on my thigh.
What's going on in here?
My dad, he was not okay with me getting hit by my grandpa for not handing him the mail, of all things. It just escalated. My grandpa, his back against the wall, too. My dad putting his fist through the wall, maybe 4 inches to the side of my grandfather's head. I never saw my dad become this violent, and it scared me. My dad was in a criminal motorcycle gang. I was around people who may or may not commit crimes. I don't really want to talk about that part so much. I'm not comfortable. If I say one thing wrong, that may not go well.
Get in here.
Ow, you're hurting me.
So I remember this time my dad telling me I had to get down on the floor in the bathroom. Somebody was shooting at the house. He piled blankets, clothes, pillows on me, asked me to not leave the bathroom until he said it was safe and okay. It was pretty scary. I was trying to press myself down further to the floor, and I was already laying on the floor. You can't really get much closer than that. It felt like an eternity. I remember hearing my own heartbeat in my ears.
Have you ever seen your dad confessing to your mother's murder?
I have not ever seen my dad's confession to the police. I only know what I have heard by word of mouth.
Okay, go ahead and press the space bar.
What's her name? Martha Booth. Martha. Now, where's she from? Erlanger, Kentucky. Martha's your ex, daughter of Michelle. Well, she was my wife at the time. She's still my wife whenever it was. Did you suffocate her or did you put her in the bathtub dry? I don't know. I was just trying to make sure. The bathtub was just to make sure she was gone. Yeah.
It's about as deliberate as it gets. Bastard. Damn. I wasn't anticipating that. I wasn't anticipating motions. I was anticipating listening and understanding. Oh, God.
Do you regret watching that?
I don't have regrets. It helps. It's always emotional torture to go through the process. It just depends on the day. I am hoping that he has the ability to lead me closer to the truth.
Ain't no question of that. It looks like a piece of genius work for a piece of reason. You'll never believe it, somebody other mother. I'm telling you. But that's not nothing to be proud of. That's just how my brain works.
I would like to know the truth. He would not talk to me about the subject matter of the murders.
Do you think he'll answer my questions?
I believe that because you guys aren't me, that my dad would answer a lot of questions.
Hello. This call is from a corrections facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. To accept this call, press 0. Hello?
How are you?
I'm okay. Did you get my email?
I got one about a week ago that said that you talked to my daughter, and the board's executive assistant woke me up this morning and wanted to know. She said, this reporter lady wants to come and see you. If she comes to see you, are you going to speak with her? And I said, yes.
Listen, though, if I come out there and I do this interview and if all this falls into place and we get a camera crew in there, I'm going to ask you questions about what you did.
The thing that people need to know is they just couldn't tell another lie.
This picture is my mom just smiling. I don't really remember seeing my mom smile a lot. I couldn't tell you what her voice sounded like. I couldn't tell you what her hair smelled like. But had my dad never killed my mom, I wouldn't have to wonder what her voice sounded like. I remember I ran outside to the swing set a little while after my dad and her got into a little bit of an argument.
How could you be so stupid?
There was a lot of name calling. They were fighting and arguing and chasing each other.
You buried us both.
I sat on the swing set for what felt like an eternity. Then it was just silence. A while later, he came out and said that my mom left. But I did not see my mom leave. My dad had told me that he was going to take me to my grandma and grandpa for a few days. When we were leaving, my dad pulled a barrel out of the garage to give me room to go through. He worked on cars in the garage, so it wasn't really abnormal to have oil drums and stuff at the house. And we left. We didn't really have any notion or indication that we should report her as missing. My mom did have a history of leaving for anywhere from days to weeks at a time, but she always did come back. Nobody thought it was really out of the ordinary. My dad told us she was somewhere up north in Ohio. She was okay. She still wasn't coming back. There was always a feeling of abandonment. I had thought that she willingly left me behind and no longer cared. My dad started seeing Cynthia Pickens, and we just called her Cindy. For summer break, I would go out and spend a couple days to a week at a time with my dad and Cindy. The times I can remember the best were just her and I sitting on the porch talking. It was refreshing. It was just me and Cindy sitting, talking, and just enjoying our days. My dad had stated that they had gotten into an argument and that he kicked her out of the house and told her to leave. It felt pretty normal for my dad to be tired of who he was with and ready to move on. I think I was too young to be anything more than oblivious that there was a coincidence, and my mother no longer being around and not seen, and Cindy no longer being around and not seen. March 15th of 2005, my dad was in jail for criminal menacing and was awaiting trial. One of the news stations was showing that a body had been found out at a garage. The video of the front of the shop looked really familiar to me, and I had thought that it may have been my dad's shop. When the police arrived to investigate, there was just this hole in the floor that was covered in gravel. In the gravel hole, they found human remains.
Hello. This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. To accept this call, press 0.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Long time, huh? So let me give you an update. I've reached out to the prison. They said that we can come do an interview.
Listen, I'm a son of a bitch. I'll scream at you. I ain't gonna phone up on you. I'll cuss you up. but I will never in life lie to you.
Well, that bitch like you got the best of me. So you choked her? Well, yeah, I was what ended up happening. I might have stabbed her, but I don't think she was still alive.
But then the best thing she's called right
Yeah, it would have. But I up and I'm owning it.
In the end, they were able to identify that as Cindy's remains. My dad had, I guess, buried Cindy in this small grave in the ground in the shop after he had killed her. About 2 days after they found Cindy's body, the police had came to my grandparents' house. The police began digging up the sidewalk at my grandparents' house. And they were excavating the area where the sidewalk was poured. They did, in fact, find a 55-gallon oil drum. When my dad had admitted to killing Cindy, he had also revealed that he had killed my mother and that they could locate her body in a 55-gallon oil drum that was buried beneath a concrete sidewalk.
Martha, your ex, daughter Michelle, how did she get to the barrel?
I was by myself. I got her a 55-gallon oil drum, stood it up with the lid on, put the ring on it, tightened it with a wrench.
Hey, man.
And that is the barrel that my mom was buried in. It was a mixture of emotions, and I believe a sense of shock about the entirety of it all. I didn't know how to feel about it.
It is what it is. You know what I mean?
It's just not it's not as done as you would want it to be or anyone else would want it to be frank. The whole actuality of you killing my mom and Cindy, like, it's just not something that's going to be washed away.
Listen, I think I'm done talking about this, because what you're gonna do is try to beat me to death. I'm cool.
I would like to know why he felt he had a need to kill my mom. Why he felt he had a need to kill Cindy. Why he hid their bodies. I have asked him. I spent years literally yelling at him in the 15-minute phone calls. He got tired of being yelled at, so we just don't really talk about it a lot anymore. If you can get answers from my dad, I would really be impressed.
So I talked to Michelle over the last couple days.
Right.
And she had a lot of unanswered questions that she wanted me to ask you.
Right.
Are you willing and open to listen to what she wants to know?
Sure.
Okay. I'm speaking for Michelle, okay?
You better
I'm
be.
just doing what she's asked me to ask you.
You better be.
I better be.
You better be.
Michelle wants to know the details. She's seeking answers. Talk me through the day that you killed her mom.
I mean, I don't know that it started off any different than any other day. We got into a big argument, and it pursued into a big fight, and I choked her. I don't know how much more macabre you want to get than that.
It's not me wanting to know everything. It's your daughter.
You know what I mean? I don't know. I can't remember every single little thing. I mean, I killed her. I don't know what you want me to say.
I want you to say the truth and step by step what you did to her that day, from the living room to the bathroom to the drum.
I don't exactly remember.
I think you do.
I think I don't.
Why is it so hard to tell me?
I don't know, prosecutor.
Can you please just tell me in as much detail as you can, and tell this for the sake of Michelle's wanting to know this? Just say it.
All right, I killed her. I dug her to the bathtub. She was dead for sure. I took her and put her in the drum, put the lid on the drum, put the band on the drum, and bolted it down tight.
I have a memory of when I do believe was the last time she was alive. It would have been the day that I was asked to stay out of the house on the swing set. I would like my dad to enlighten me if that was the day, because that would be critical for my own mental health to be able to move forward from that.
She went outside and she sat on the swing set. Is that the day that you killed her mother?
No.
How can you be sure?
Because when I killed her mother, she was staying with friends and had been for several days.
I do think that I may have seen my mom at one point in a memory that blocked itself out until after she was found. My dad had pulled the barrel out of my way to give me room to walk through the garage. On my way past the barrel, I believe I did note my mom's body in there. I saw hair, what looked like hair and flesh, sitting just beneath the top of the barrel.
It never happened. Are you gonna let your kid walk up and see a body? No, neither am I. Come on, that's ridiculous. She might have seen the drum. She didn't see no body. The top was bolted on it with wrenches.
Okay. Well, why does she have this memory of seeing her mother
I
in?
don't know. I mean, she could have guilt, like where she could think, you know, that she should have known, but she didn't. You know what I mean? Or she should have known, but she didn't want to. You know what I mean? Are you gonna let your kid walk up and see a body? No, neither am I. Come on, that's ridiculous.
I know that my memory is not lying to me. I know that I saw my mom in the barrel. He went from trying to stay calm and collected to smiling and smirking. He knows he's full of crap. He is definitely lying as far as I'm concerned. My dad told me that he had wanted to build a sidewalk at my grandparents' house to help my older grandparents be able to get to the side door up the patio without having to walk down into the grass. My dad had asked me to stay indoors, and very specifically requested me to not look out the windows. But being very curious, I took a bit of a glimpse out anyway. I didn't know how a sidewalk was built, so when I'd seen my dad place the drum in the concrete, I had just assumed that it was a part of the process. The reality of that day is he hid my mom's body under a facade that it was to help my grandparents. In actuality, it was to help hide his crime.
The day you took Marty's body in the drum to your parents' house, Michelle remembers you telling her to wait inside and don't look out the window.
Probably.
She's convinced that she saw this 55-gallon drum.
She was in the house. I don't know what room she was in. If she would have went in my mom's room and looked out the window, she'd have been looking right at me.
So why did you choose your parents' house in the first place?
I don't know why I chose my parents' house, probably just because they wanted that step forward. And it was a big enough spot to put the barrel. And I didn't know what else I was gonna do with it. And I thought I was getting ready to go to jail on some drug charges. On some level, I'm sure I kept her there where I know where she was, like some kind of control thing or something. That was the best I could do. That was the best place I could find to put Marty's body at that time. It was just the right place at the right time type thing.
All right, so why did you kill her mother?
Marty was snitching. When you're in the bike gang, it is what it is. The bike gang I was in didn't pass out cookies and Barbie dolls to children. The bikers do today what organized crime did 50 years ago. Our mom was doing a bunch of stuff that was going to get my whole family killed. There was a guy that hung around our club, and he copied a big stack of papers for the Claremont County Sheriff's Department and showed me where she was snitching on everybody. All to get out of a felony 5, they wouldn't have did anything to her. She would probably went to drug court or something. So, if you bring anybody around them clubs, it could be your wife, it could be your kid, it could be your brother, your sister, and they start that stuff, you have to take care of it. Period.
So what did you do?
What do you mean, what did I do? You know what I did, I killed her. And I don't particularly know that I planned on killing her, but I killed her.
It's even harder to realize that it was more deliberate than potentially a disagreement. I have always hoped that his admittance to having murdered her was to give me a sense of closure in the situation. I feel like an answer for why, but it's still not good enough to be why. I don't know when my dad became what he is today, but the man in that video would not be someone I want to claim as my father.
Damn. Ah, Jesus.
People think I don't have a conscience, but I do have a conscience. That's the whole reason I told them about Marty. Because I didn't want my daughter to grow up thinking that her mom just didn't want her. How could Michelle feel like anything but an orphan? It's horrible what I did. None of it is in any way her fault. She needs to know that. I'll apologize to her every day if I need to. Because I am sorry. And she is my daughter and I love her very much. The day she was born was the most happy day of my life. And I couldn't be more proud of her. The most cool thing for me right now would be to be able to babysit my grandson when my daughter was at work. Not the motorcycles, not the women, not the drugs, not being in the news and a newspaper, none of that. If I could clean the slate and start over, that's where I would want to be. Hopefully, she'll take away some kind of closure from all this. I think you probably helped her to get to the bottom of it, kind of thing. And I appreciate that because I feel like maybe that'll help her to heal some. I wish if I could do it over, I would never do it again. I'm so sorry, Daddy loves you.
That was sincere. And I do believe he'd like to be around my son. I wish he wouldn't have screwed his life up so bad that he wouldn't have the opportunity.
I wish I never killed Michelle's mother. I wish none of it ever happened. But you can't take that back. There's that line again. Once you cross that line, you can't take that back. You know, it just don't work. There's no way of taking it back. How my life turned into the pile of it turned into. It didn't happen overnight. It just happens little by little by little by little. There was a time when I just said, I'll never do something like that. The victim is my daughter. She don't have a mom or dad now. She's the victim. I really did love my kid. I still love my kid. But I was man enough to own up to what I did. You know what kind of balls it took to do that? You have any idea what kind of balls it took to do that? Do you have a clue? Do you have a clue? Come on, man.
Can we talk about Cynthia? Well, we're going to talk about Cynthia. So you stabbed her, and when she was dead, you got a tarp.
Wrapped her in a tarp. Took her up there to the shop and put her in a hole in the floor.
Did she deserve better than that?
Well, sure, everybody deserves better than that. Everybody deserves better than that. I accept responsibility for everything I've ever done. I didn't have to kill anybody. Those women ain't the only people I ever killed either. You know, certain factions of law enforcement are to be believed. I've killed 35 men and 2 women. I think they're a little optimistic on their numbers.
So there's a lot of victims, a lot of your victims out there?
Oh, yeah.
Well, tell me about that. That's interesting.
Tell you about what?
I mean, we're opening a whole nother can of worms here.
I'm not trying to ride the lightning, kid.
You don't want to come forward on all those people?
No. Nope.
How many?
I don't know, probably 20. Well, thank you. You're either my best friend or my worst enemy. I ain't decided which yet. I'll get back to you on that.
You can think about that one and let me know.
Well, y'all have a good one.
Do you want to say anything else to Michelle, like while we're here? Last words? So there's a lot of your victims out there?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Tell you about what?
It's kind of up to say that you killed 20 people and sit there and laugh about it. It's disgusting, for one. To not only throw your life away, but throw that many other people's lives away. I think it would be a good thing if he were to admit who the supposed 20 different people are that he's killed besides my mom and Cindy, because the people related to those people deserve closure. When I was a kid, I wanted to be just like my dad. Definitely do not want to be just like my dad today. I'm living my life instead of allowing the trauma of the murders to continue to hold me back. I'm raising my son and tending to my job and maintaining a home. I grew up to be a better person than he clearly could commit to being. It's just safer for everybody if he is where he is. I believe that my dad is still very much capable of just as much violence as prior. Nobody else needs to die at his hand. I have started asking my dad to contact me less. I still want to maintain some contact, but minimal contact. I try to move forward in life with a sense that it's a new day that is the past, and I cannot change the past. I don't try to show forgiveness for him for his benefit, but rather for my own and my own healing. I never thought he would kill somebody, but it's just sad.
You murdered a mother holding a child. It just doesn't look like my dad. I've never seen him look that evil.
I felt at that minute I had to kill her.
I ain't no angel, but I ain't evil.
I wanted that piece of out of my house.
We had a pact, and we were going to die together.
I just shot him. I didn't have a reason.
That right there is what pisses me off.
I will burn every possession her and her fat family own.
Are you friggin' kidding me? I'm so angry. I wish he would have died.
Part 1. The man who killed for a living. There are killers who act in rage. Killers who lose control in a moment of passion. Killers driven by obsession, jealousy, revenge, or madness. And then there are men like Gerald Gallant. Men who treat murder like a trade. Like plumbing. Like carpentry. Like any other job. A man calls. A price is discussed. A target is identified. A life ends. For decades, across the eastern provinces of Canada, people disappeared into the darkness of unsolved murders. Drug traffickers were found dead in parking lots. Rival gang members collapsed on sidewalks with bullets in their chests. Men who owed money never came home. Others vanished without warning, leaving behind confused families and frightened associates who refused to speak. Police departments opened files. Detectives chased leads. Witnesses remained silent. Evidence disappeared. Years passed. Then more years. And the cases began collecting dust. The dead were buried. The killers were never found. Or so everyone believed. Because hidden behind those cold cases was a quiet man with a remarkable memory. A man who remembered every face. Every location. Every payment. Every shot. A man who would eventually sit across from investigators and calmly describe murder after murder after murder. 28 killings. 28 confirmed contracts. 28 human beings reduced to assignments. The number shocked even veteran detectives. Not because they had never seen violence before. Not because they had never dealt with organized crime. But because of the way Gallant talked about it. No trembling hands. No emotional breakdown. No visible remorse. No tears. Only details. Precise details. Like a mechanic explaining how he repaired an engine years earlier. One detective would later admit that the most disturbing thing wasn't the body count. It was the calmness. The complete absence of emotion. As if the deaths belonged to somebody else's life. As if he had merely been performing a service. But long before the confessions. Long before the headlines. Long before police realized they were speaking to one of the most prolific contract killers in Canadian history. There were the victims. A cold Atlantic morning. A man walks toward his car. The air smells of salt from the nearby coast. His breath forms small clouds in front of his face. He reaches into his pocket for his keys. A black vehicle is parked farther down the street. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. The neighborhood is quiet. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. A screen door slams. The man unlocks his car. He never sees the shooter. A figure appears. A gun emerges. Several shots crack through the morning air. The victim collapses beside the driver's door. Within seconds, the gunman is gone. No argument. No warning. No dramatic confrontation. Just efficiency. By the time emergency responders arrive, the killer has already disappeared. Witnesses remember almost nothing. The case joins countless others. Months later, hundreds of miles away, another target dies. Different city. Different motive. Different client. Same result. Again, there are few witnesses. Again, investigators struggle to establish a clear suspect. Again, fear spreads through the criminal underworld. People begin whispering. Somebody is cleaning house. Somebody is eliminating problems. Somebody is making people disappear. Yet nobody knows exactly who. That anonymity becomes one of the deadliest weapons in organized crime. Fear grows strongest when it has no face. And for years, Gerald Gallant had no face. At least not one known to law enforcement. He existed in rumors. In whispers exchanged behind closed doors. In conversations held inside bars where men lowered their voices whenever his name surfaced. Those who knew him understood something important. Gallant was patient. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't reckless. He didn't seek attention. He didn't crave headlines. He wasn't trying to become famous. In many ways, that made him even more dangerous. Because the most effective predators rarely announce themselves. They observe. They wait. They learn. Then they strike. By the late 20th century, organized crime in eastern Canada had become a complex ecosystem of alliances, rivalries, drug networks, debts, betrayals, and power struggles. Money flowed through hidden channels. Cocaine moved across borders. Motorcycle gangs expanded influence. Street-level dealers answered to larger organizations. And whenever conflicts threatened profits, solutions were required. Sometimes those solutions came in the form of intimidation. Sometimes extortion. Sometimes violence. And sometimes a phone call would be made. A specific man would be contacted. A price would be discussed. And another human life would be marked for destruction. What made Gallant different from many killers was his apparent ability to separate emotion from action. Most murder investigations eventually uncover anger, hatred, jealousy, resentment, something personal. But contract killings operate differently. The victim may be a complete stranger. The killer may know almost nothing about them. Their lives intersect for only a few seconds. One person arrives. One person leaves. Everything changes forever. Imagine how terrifying that reality becomes. You are not killed because somebody hates you. You are killed because somebody paid for your death. Because somewhere, hidden behind layers of criminal relationships, someone decided you were worth more dead than alive. That world existed for decades throughout parts of Atlantic Canada and Quebec. A world invisible to ordinary citizens. A world where debts could become death sentences. Where loyalty was enforced through fear. Where betrayal carried permanent consequences. And moving through that world was Gerald Gallant. Quiet. Patient. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The strange thing about professional killers is that they often look ordinary. History rarely gives them horns. They don't walk around announcing what they are. Neighbors may know them. Friends may drink with them. People may pass them in grocery stores. Children may walk by them on sidewalks. Nobody realizing they are standing next to someone capable of ending a life with mechanical precision. That contradiction sits at the heart of this story. Because Gerald Gallant was not remembered as a loud gangster. He was not a flamboyant crime boss surrounded by bodyguards and luxury cars. He was something more difficult to understand. A specialist. A man whose reputation spread not because of what he said, but because of what he could do. And for years, he did it remarkably well. Too well. Cases remained unsolved. Families waited for answers. Detectives retired without closing investigations. The dead became photographs inside evidence folders. Then something unexpected happened. The machine broke. The silence cracked. The man who had spent decades hiding in the shadows suddenly found himself facing a future that terrified even him. Prison. Life imprisonment. The possibility that his freedom was over. And when that possibility became real, something extraordinary happened. The killer started talking. What followed would expose decades of violence hidden beneath the surface of Canadian organized crime. It would reopen forgotten investigations. It would force detectives to revisit crime scenes long abandoned. It would reveal connections nobody had previously seen. And it would introduce the public to a chilling reality. Some of Canada's most notorious unsolved murders had not been random. They had not been mysteries. They had been contracts, assignments, business transactions. And sitting at the center of those revelations was one man. A man who claimed responsibility for 28 murders. A man who remembered them all. A man who treated death as a profession. His name was Gerald Gallant. And this is the story of how one of the most prolific contract killers in Canadian history managed to operate in the shadows for decades before finally revealing the truth himself. To understand Gerald Gallant, you first have to understand the world that allowed him to exist. Not the world seen on postcards. Not the Canada tourists imagine when they think of snow-covered mountains, peaceful lakes, and quiet towns. But another Canada. A darker Canada. A hidden Canada that existed beneath the surface during the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. A A Canada where organized crime quietly expanded across provinces. A Canada where drug money flowed through ports and highways. A Canada where biker gangs, smugglers, traffickers, and career criminals built networks that stretched for hundreds of miles. It was a world that most ordinary citizens never saw. Yet it was always there. Behind certain bars. Inside certain warehouses. At isolated motels along rural highways. In garages where motorcycles sat lined up beneath fluorescent lights. In back rooms where deals were made with handshakes instead of contracts. And in that world, violence was not an exception. It was a tool. Eastern Canada during those decades was changing rapidly. The provinces of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and Quebec were connected by roads, shipping routes, and growing criminal enterprises. The Atlantic coast offered opportunities for legitimate commerce. It also offered opportunities for criminals. Ships arrived from distant countries. Goods crossed borders. Money changed hands. Wherever money moved, organized crime found a way to follow. By the late 20th century, the illegal drug trade had become one of the most profitable criminal businesses in North America. The demand seemed endless. The profits were enormous. And competition was ruthless. A single territory could be worth millions. A single trafficking route could generate fortunes. A single betrayal could cost someone their life. The rules of this underground economy were simple. Trust very few people. Never show weakness. Never cooperate with police. And never become a liability. Those who forgot these rules often disappeared. Sometimes they were beaten. Sometimes they vanished. Sometimes they were found dead. The message was always the same. Fear was a form of communication. Among the groups competing for power were outlaw motorcycle gangs. To outsiders, they looked like collections of men who loved motorcycles, leather jackets, and long rides on open roads. But investigators knew a different reality. Many biker organizations had evolved into highly structured criminal enterprises. Some controlled drug distribution. Others engaged in extortion. Some specialized in weapons trafficking. Others became involved in money laundering and contract violence. Power inside these organizations was maintained through loyalty and intimidation. Respect was earned through reputation. And reputation often depended upon a willingness to use violence. The biker culture that emerged during this era carried its own mythology. Freedom, brotherhood, rebellion, strength. But beneath those romanticized images existed something much harsher. Internal rivalries, leadership struggles, paranoia, suspicion. Members constantly tested one another's loyalty. Informants were feared. Traitors were despised. And punishments could be severe. In this environment, a professional killer possessed tremendous value. Most criminals can threaten. Many can fight. Some can shoot. But very few can consistently kill targets without being caught. That distinction made people like Gallon important. Not famous. Not celebrated. Important. Because organized crime often requires specialists. People who perform tasks others are unwilling or unable to do. Some forge documents. Some transport drugs. Some launder money. And some eliminate problems. The geography of Eastern Canada helped create opportunities for criminals. Large stretches of rural land separated towns and cities. Dense forests covered vast regions. Fishing communities dotted the coastline. Small towns often knew one another well. Visitors stood out. But paradoxically, isolation could also provide cover. A vehicle disappearing down a country road might never attract attention. A gunshot heard in the distance could easily go unreported. A body hidden in remote wilderness might remain undiscovered for months or years. Criminal investigations faced unique challenges. Technology was limited compared to modern standards. There were no smartphones recording every movement. No social media timelines documenting daily activities. No network of security cameras capturing every intersection. DNA analysis was still developing. Digital evidence barely existed. Investigators relied heavily on witnesses. And witnesses in organized crime cases often remained silent. Fear was powerful. People understood what could happen to those who cooperated with authorities. Rumors spread quickly. Stories circulated. Someone talks. Someone disappears. Whether true or exaggerated, such stories created an atmosphere where silence became a survival strategy. For detectives, Every investigation became a battle against uncertainty. A victim is found dead. No witnesses come forward. Friends claim they know nothing. Associates refuse interviews. Potential suspects disappear. Evidence remains scarce. Weeks become months. Months become years. Files begin gathering dust. This was the environment in which many of Gallant's future crimes would occur. An environment perfectly suited for someone who valued preparation. Because preparation was one of his greatest strengths. The most dangerous predators often understand patience better than everyone else. They study. They observe. They wait for mistakes. They avoid unnecessary risks. They strike only when conditions favor them. By every account later revealed through investigations, Gallant fit this profile remarkably well. He was not known for impulsive violence. He was not the type of criminal who exploded in public arguments. He preferred calculation, control, planning. A target's routine mattered. What time they left home, where they parked, which roads they traveled, who accompanied them, where they felt safest. Every detail could become useful. Imagine waking up every morning unaware that someone has been studying your life, watching from a distance, learning your habits, identifying vulnerabilities. You continue following familiar routines because routines create comfort. You stop at the same gas station, drink coffee at the same diner, park in the same place, walk the same route. You believe your life is ordinary. Meanwhile, someone else sees those routines as opportunities. That reality haunted many organized crime investigations during the era. Because numerous victims appeared to have been specifically selected. They were not random targets. They were destinations, objectives, assignments. As years passed, violence became woven into the criminal landscape. A drug dealer is found shot. A biker member disappears. A suspected informant turns up dead. A rival gangster is ambushed. The incidents seemed disconnected. Different cities, different motives, different victims. Yet beneath the surface, hidden connections existed. Connections investigators would not fully understand until much later. The criminal underworld thrives on compartmentalization. One group knows only part of the picture. One participant knows only one name. One intermediary handles communication. Money passes through several hands. Responsibility becomes blurred. This structure protects those at the top. It also protects those who perform the killings. Even when police suspect a murder was ordered, proving who ordered it can be extraordinarily difficult. The person who wanted the victim dead may never meet the shooter. The shooter may know almost nothing about the client. Everyone maintains distance. Everyone protects themselves. And when investigations begin, those layers become barriers. Gallant operated within precisely this kind of environment. A world built on secrecy. A world where violence could be purchased. A world where human lives sometimes carried price tags. Yet outside that hidden reality, ordinary life continued. Families gathered for dinner. Children attended school. Workers drove to their jobs. Neighbors waved across driveways. Most people never imagined that contract killers were operating within the same communities. They never imagined that a man standing beside them in a grocery store might have spent years hunting targets for money. Perhaps that is what makes stories like this so unsettling. The contrast. The distance between appearance and reality. Because evil rarely announces itself. It blends in. It wears ordinary clothes. It smiles politely. It waits. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, law enforcement agencies across Canada increasingly recognized the growing threat posed by organized crime. Task forces were formed. Investigations expanded. Informants were recruited. Surveillance operations intensified. Yet success often came slowly. Criminal organizations adapted. They learned from arrests. They changed methods. They became more cautious. The battle resembled a chess match played over decades. Every move triggered a response. Every breakthrough created new obstacles. Some investigators devoted entire careers to dismantling criminal networks. Many never saw the final results. But they continued anyway. Because they understood something important. Violence leaves consequences far beyond the immediate victim. A murder affects families, friends, children, communities. The ripple effects can last generations. Every unsolved homicide leaves unanswered questions. Every unanswered question creates another wound. For years, Many families across eastern Canada carried those wounds. They buried loved ones without understanding why. They attended funerals without knowing who was responsible. They waited for phone calls that never came. They hoped for justice that seemed increasingly unlikely. What they did not know was that answers existed, hidden inside the memory of one man. A man who moved through the criminal world like a ghost. A man whose name rarely appeared in headlines. A man who spent decades avoiding the spotlight. The setting was now complete. The criminal networks were established. The violence was growing. The opportunities were everywhere. And somewhere within that landscape, Gerald Gallant was beginning a journey that would eventually make him one of the most feared contract killers in Canadian history. The murders had not yet been counted. The confessions had not yet been spoken. The investigators had not yet uncovered the truth. But the stage was ready. And the man at the center of it all was about to step out of the shadows. Part 3. The Making of a Professional Killer. Long before police officers would sit across from Gerald Gallant and hear him calmly confess to nearly 3 decades of murder, he was simply another boy growing up in eastern Canada. No one looked at the child he once was and predicted that he would become one of the deadliest contract killers in Canadian history. No teacher could have pointed to him and said that one day detectives would spend months verifying his confessions. No neighbor could have imagined that dozens of families would eventually learn that the man responsible for their loved ones' deaths had been quietly walking free for years. The truth is that evil rarely arrives fully formed. It develops. It adapts. It learns. And sometimes it hides behind a face that appears completely ordinary. Gerald Gallant was born in 1950 in New Brunswick, a province defined by rugged coastlines, dense forests, fishing communities, and small towns where people often knew one another by name. Life in many parts of Atlantic Canada during the 1950s and 1960s was not easy. Jobs were limited. Economic opportunities were scarce. Families worked hard for modest incomes. Many young men grew up understanding that survival required toughness. The world around them rewarded resilience. It rewarded people who could endure hardship without complaint. But while most young men facing those circumstances built honest lives, some drifted toward another path. A path where money could be earned faster. A path where violence became currency. A path where fear itself had value. The details of Gallant's early life remain less documented than the crimes that would later define him. What investigators would eventually learn, however, was that he possessed traits that made him exceptionally suited for organized crime. Patience, self-control, observation, the ability to remain calm under pressure. These qualities are admired in many professions. In the wrong hands, they become dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Many criminals fail because they are impulsive. They act emotionally. They lose control. They brag. They attract attention. Gallant appeared different. People who encountered him later often described someone who could blend into the background. Someone who didn't need to dominate every conversation. Someone who listened more than he spoke. Someone who could wait. And patience can be a terrifying weapon, especially when combined with violence. By the time Gallant entered adulthood, organized crime was growing across parts of eastern Canada. Drug trafficking networks were expanding. Outlaw biker organizations were increasing their influence. Criminal groups were becoming more sophisticated. Money was flowing. And wherever large amounts of money exist, conflict inevitably follows. Every territory has value. Every distribution route has value. Every customer has value. When profits increase, competition intensifies. Sooner or later, someone becomes an obstacle that somebody wants removed. At first, Gallant occupied the lower levels of the criminal world. He was not a kingpin. He was not a gang leader. He was not giving orders. But people noticed something. When difficult tasks arose, he did not hesitate. When others felt nervous, he remained composed. When danger appeared, he did not panic. These qualities earned respect. And in organized crime, respect can be more valuable than money. Word travels quickly in criminal circles. Not through newspapers. Not through public announcements. But through whispers. A name mentioned during a meeting. A story shared at a bar. A reputation passed from one associate to another. Eventually, Gallant became known as someone capable of handling serious problems. The phrase sounds harmless. A serious problem. But in the language of organized crime, a serious problem often means a human being. a rival dealer, a witness, a debtor, a traitor, someone who knows too much, someone who refuses to cooperate, someone standing between another criminal and a large amount of money. Those are the moments when violence enters the equation. And those are the moments that created opportunities for Gallant. The criminal underworld has always depended on specialists. Not everyone can launder money. Not everyone can smuggle drugs across borders. Not everyone can forge documents. And not everyone can kill. The difference between an ordinary criminal and a professional killer is not simply willingness. It is consistency. A professional killer must be reliable. He must avoid mistakes. He must avoid arrest. He must complete assignments. Most importantly, he must remain alive. Failure can be fatal. A botched robbery might result in prison. A failed contract killing can result in execution by the very people who hired you. Gallant seemed to understand this reality from the beginning. Unlike many violent offenders, he did not seek recognition. He did not cultivate celebrity. He did not chase headlines. He preferred invisibility. And invisibility became one of his greatest assets. Imagine standing in a crowded parking lot. Dozens of people move around you. Cars arrive. Cars leave. Conversations fill the air. Nobody appears suspicious. Then, without warning, gunshots erupt. A target falls. The shooter disappears. Panic spreads. Witnesses scramble. Within minutes, police arrive. Questions begin. What did the shooter look like? What direction did he go? What vehicle was involved? The answers are often frustratingly vague. Everything happened too quickly. This was the environment in which Gallant thrived. He studied people. He studied locations. He studied routines. Unlike impulsive killers who act during emotional explosions, Gallant approached violence as preparation. A target's habits mattered. What time they left home, where they worked, who they met, which roads they traveled, how long they remained at specific locations. Every detail reduced uncertainty. Every detail increased the probability of success. Over time, stories about Gallant began circulating within criminal networks. The stories shared common themes: efficiency, discipline, professionalism. Not professionalism in the legitimate sense. Professionalism in murder. A horrifying concept, yet one that accurately described how many criminals viewed him. To them, Gallant was not simply dangerous. He was dependable. Dependability is a prized commodity in organized crime, because organized crime is fundamentally built on risk. Every transaction carries risk. Every partnership carries risk. Every criminal enterprise carries risk. People who reduce risk become valuable. Gallant reduced risk. Or at least that was the perception. As years passed, his reputation grew. The requests increased. The contracts multiplied. Some victims were rival criminals. Others were alleged informants. Some were accused of betrayal. Others became targets because of financial disputes. Many never knew a decision had been made regarding their fate. Some probably sensed danger. Others likely believed they had more time. Most victims of contract killings never receive a warning. That is part of what makes them so terrifying. The attack arrives unexpectedly. The violence is sudden. The opportunity for escape rarely exists. At some point during these years, Gallant crossed an invisible psychological line, a line separating those who commit violence from those who normalize it. Most people, even many criminals, experience emotional consequences after taking a life. Fear, guilt, nightmares, regret, something. But investigators would later discover something deeply unsettling about Gallant. He remembered his murders. He remembered details. He remembered dates, locations, payments, clients. Yet when discussing the victims themselves, emotion appeared largely absent. It was as if the killings had been converted into transactions inside his mind. Assignments completed. Jobs finished. Files closed. That emotional detachment became one of the most chilling aspects of his later confessions, because it suggested something profound. Gallant was not killing because he lost control. He was killing because he had control. Total control. The ability to walk toward a target with a steady hand. The ability to pull a trigger without hesitation. The ability to leave the scene and continue living normally afterward. That level of compartmentalization is rare. And dangerous. Extremely dangerous. By the 1980s and 1990s, Gallant had become deeply embedded within a criminal ecosystem fueled by drugs, money, loyalty, and violence. The murders accumulated. The victims accumulated. The investigations accumulated. Yet Gallant remained free. Case after case entered police archives. Detectives chased leads that went nowhere. Families waited for answers. Years passed. Then more years. Still, the truth remained hidden. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Gallant's story is not the number of murders. It is the length of time he avoided accountability. Every successful contract killing reinforced his reputation. Every unsolved investigation strengthened his confidence. Every year without arrest made him seem untouchable. And that belief, that he could continue forever, would ultimately become his greatest mistake. Because history shows that even the most careful criminals eventually encounter something they cannot control. A witness, a mistake, a betrayal, a change in circumstances, a single event capable of unraveling decades of secrecy. For Gerald Gallant, that moment was approaching. The professional killer had spent years operating in the shadows. He had built a reputation feared throughout portions of Canada's criminal underworld. He had survived where many others had died. But the very skills that made him valuable would eventually place him directly in the crosshairs of law enforcement. And when that happened, investigators would begin uncovering a truth far darker than anyone imagined. The body count was larger. The timeline was longer. And the man at the center of it all had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Part 4. The Incidents. Murder rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with dramatic music or flashing warning signs. Most of the time, it appears as an ordinary day. A man leaves home. A woman walks toward her car. Someone stops for coffee. Someone heads to work. Someone believes tomorrow is guaranteed. Then everything changes. For the victims connected to Gerald Gallant, death often arrived that way. Suddenly. Efficiently. Without mercy. Without explanation. Long before police knew his name, long before investigators began connecting cases, bodies were already appearing across eastern Canada. Some were discovered beside vehicles. Some collapsed on sidewalks. Others were found in isolated areas far from witnesses. The crime scenes varied. The outcomes did not. A life ended. The killer vanished. And another family entered a nightmare. One of the most disturbing aspects of contract murder is the randomness experienced by everyone except the people involved. The client understands why the victim has been targeted. The killer understands the assignment. But everyone else remains confused. Family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, police officers. They are left searching for motives hidden beneath layers of criminal secrecy. Many of Gallant's future victims belonged to the criminal underworld. Some trafficked narcotics. Some associated with organized crime groups. Some were suspected informants. Others had crossed the wrong people at the wrong time. Yet regardless of their backgrounds, their deaths created the same devastating aftermath. A chair left empty at a dinner table. A phone that never rings again. A family waiting for answers. In public imagination, contract killings often appear glamorous. Movies portray them as sophisticated operations carried out by sharply dressed assassins. Reality is uglier. Far uglier. Real murder leaves blood. Real murder leaves trauma. Real murder leaves parents burying children. Spouses identifying bodies. Investigators standing over corpses in rain-soaked parking lots. There is nothing glamorous about it. Only destruction. And during the height of Gallant's criminal career, destruction became routine. Imagine a target living his life. Perhaps he knows he has enemies. Perhaps he does not. Either way, he follows familiar routines. Every morning, he leaves at roughly the same time. He parks in the same place. Visits the same locations. Speaks to the same people. To him, these habits feel normal. To a professional killer, they become opportunities. Gallant reportedly spent considerable time studying targets before acting. That patience separated him from impulsive offenders. He understood that success often depended upon information. The more information available, the fewer surprises. The fewer surprises, the lower the risk. Some targets were watched for days. Others for weeks. Movements were observed. Patterns were identified. Weaknesses were located. Only then would the final stage begin. The victim rarely knew it was happening. A man might walk out of a restaurant after dinner. the night air cold against his face. Streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. He unlocks his vehicle. Perhaps he is thinking about business. Perhaps he is thinking about home. Perhaps he is thinking about nothing at all. Then footsteps approach. A shadow emerges. Gunfire erupts. Everything ends within seconds. Witnesses later struggle to describe what they saw. It happened too fast. The shooter was gone before anyone could react. Police arrive. Yellow tape appears. Photographs are taken. Shell casings are collected. Interviews begin. The process repeats itself. Again, and again, and again. Years pass this way. Different victims. Different locations. Identical results. The inability of law enforcement to immediately connect many of these crimes created a significant advantage for those responsible. Each homicide appeared isolated. A separate investigation. A separate file. A separate tragedy. Only much later would authorities begin realizing that certain patterns existed beneath the surface. But during the active years of violence, those patterns remained hidden. The underworld noticed them long before police did. Among criminals, stories circulated. Someone had been eliminated. Another rival had disappeared. Another problem had been solved. The details varied, but the whispers often pointed toward the same frightening possibility. A professional was involved. Not a hot-headed gang member. Not an amateur. A professional. That distinction mattered. Because professionals are predictable in one important way. They prioritize success. Emotion becomes secondary. The objective becomes everything. Investigators later learned that Gallant viewed many assignments with startling detachment. Victims became names, addresses, photographs, schedules, tasks. The humanity of the target often seemed absent from the equation. That emotional disconnect may explain how he was able to continue killing over such a long period. Most people struggle to imagine taking a single life. Gallant eventually admitted involvement in 28 murders. 28. Pause and consider that number. 28 separate moments when a human being was alive 1 minute and dead the next. 28 families forever altered. 28 crime scenes. 28 stories abruptly ending. What becomes even more unsettling is the apparent lack of personal hatred involved in many cases. Serial killers driven by rage or obsession often develop emotional fixation on their victims. Gallant did not appear to operate that way. Many targets were strangers. Their deaths were business transactions. Nothing more. A payment offered. An agreement reached. A murder completed. That level of emotional distance is difficult for most people to comprehend. Because ordinary human beings instinctively connect violence to emotion. Anger, fear, jealousy, revenge. But contract killing introduces something colder. Profit. Profit transforms murder into a service. And services can be repeated. Again and again. Across multiple cities. Across multiple decades. As Gallant's reputation expanded, requests reportedly increased. Within criminal circles, success attracts attention. A person capable of accomplishing dangerous tasks becomes valuable. Value creates demand. Demand creates opportunity. The cycle feeds itself. Meanwhile, investigators across various jurisdictions continued facing the same obstacles. Witnesses reluctant to cooperate. Victims connected to criminal activity. Limited forensic technology compared to modern standards. Fear of retaliation. Silence. Always silence. The silence protected killers. The silence protected clients. The silence buried truth. Many homicide detectives eventually develop a sense for particular types of crime scenes. Some murders feel spontaneous. Others feel personal. Some feel chaotic. Contract killings often feel different. There is purpose. Efficiency. Minimal interaction. Minimal evidence. The objective is straightforward. Arrive. Kill. Leave. No speeches. No arguments. No unnecessary risks. Several investigators later reviewing Gallant's admissions noticed this recurring theme. He was not interested in theatrics. He was interested in results. Results built his reputation. Results kept him employed within criminal networks. Results allowed him to remain active for years. Yet every successful crime also increased future danger. Each murder created another potential witness. Another potential informant. Another opportunity for mistakes. No matter how careful someone becomes, the odds eventually shift. The larger the body count grows, the greater the chance something goes wrong. A vehicle is seen. A conversation is overheard. An associate gets arrested. A former ally decides to cooperate. Criminal careers often collapse not because of one major mistake, but because of dozens of small vulnerabilities accumulating over time. Gallant simply managed to avoid that collapse longer than most. By the late 1990s, investigators across parts of eastern Canada were still confronting unsolved killings connected to organized crime. Families still lacked answers. Files remained open. Questions remained unresolved. Yet hidden inside those unanswered questions was a single common thread. A man who remembered everything. A man who continued moving through the shadows. A man whose calm exterior concealed a history of extraordinary violence. The murders had become part of the landscape. Another shooting. Another victim. Another funeral. Another investigation. The cycle seemed endless. No one outside a small circle of criminals understood just how many deaths could eventually be traced back to one individual. No one realized that the man responsible was quietly carrying decades of secrets. For years, those secrets remained buried. The victims stayed silent because they were dead. The clients stayed silent because exposure meant prison. The killer stayed silent because silence guaranteed freedom. But secrets have weight, and the greater the number of secrets, the heavier they become. Eventually that weight begins to crack even the strongest foundations. For Gerald Gallant, that moment was approaching. The murders had already happened. The bodies had already been buried. The investigations had already gone cold. But somewhere ahead, waiting beyond years of violence and deception, was the event that would change everything. An arrest, a choice, and a confession that would force Canada to confront one of the most prolific contract killers it had ever produced. Part 5, The Discovery. The most important crime scene in the story of Gerald Gallant was not a parking lot. It was not a roadside shooting. It was not a dark alley where a victim collapsed beneath the glow of streetlights. The most important crime scene existed inside police archives. Inside forgotten filing cabinets. Inside dusty boxes stacked on shelves. Inside homicide reports that investigators had nearly given up solving. Because the discovery that would ultimately expose Gerald Gallant did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened piece by piece, file by file, body by body, memory by memory. For years, law enforcement agencies throughout eastern Canada had been chasing ghosts. A murdered drug dealer in one province, a slain biker in another, a suspected informant found dead hundreds of kilometers away. Each case generated questions. Each case produced theories. Each case consumed valuable investigative resources. Yet answers remained frustratingly out of reach. The victims often shared connections to organized crime. That alone complicated everything. Criminals tend to associate with other criminals. Witnesses fear retaliation. Associates lie. Evidence disappears. Truth becomes difficult to separate from rumor. Every investigator who worked organized crime understood this reality. A witness might know exactly who committed a murder. That witness might never speak. Someone else might have heard a confession. They remain silent. A third person might have helped arrange the killing. They disappear before police can question them. The result is a maze of dead ends. And for years, many of these investigations seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. Families waited. Detectives retired. Cases grew older. The passage of time became another enemy. Memories faded. Witnesses died. Physical evidence deteriorated. Hope slowly disappeared. Then something changed. The change did not begin with a breakthrough forensic test. It did not begin with a dramatic witness suddenly appearing. It began when law enforcement started looking more carefully at patterns. Patterns that had once seemed unrelated. Patterns hidden beneath decades of violence. Organized crime investigations often resemble assembling a puzzle without knowing what the final image should look like. One detective has a piece. Another province has a different piece. A third agency possesses something else entirely. Only when those pieces are combined does the picture become visible. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, investigators increasingly recognized that many unsolved murders shared common characteristics. Victims connected to criminal activity, targeted attacks, minimal evidence, professional execution, rapid escape. No obvious suspects. The similarities were difficult to ignore. Still, similarities alone are not enough to solve murders. Detectives need names, evidence, witnesses, something tangible, something that can survive scrutiny in court. And for years, that missing piece remained frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, Gerald Gallant continued living his life. The bodies were buried. The investigations remained open. The secrets stayed hidden, at least for a while. The irony of criminal history is that many major breakthroughs occur not because investigators suddenly become smarter, but because circumstances change. A loyal associate becomes angry. A witness experiences guilt. A criminal gets arrested on unrelated charges. Pressure creates opportunities. Opportunities create information. Information creates breakthroughs. Every experienced detective knows this. Patience matters. Sometimes the truth simply needs time. Gallant had spent decades benefiting from that reality. He survived because silence protected him. But silence is rarely permanent, especially within the criminal underworld. Loyalty in organized crime often lasts only until circumstances change. Money disappears. Power shifts. People become desperate. And desperate people make decisions they never imagined making. As investigators continued building cases against organized crime figures throughout eastern Canada, pressure increased. Drug investigations expanded. Informants emerged. Networks became vulnerable. The walls protecting long-held secrets slowly began to crack. Not collapse. Not yet. But crack. Those cracks mattered. Because every crack allowed a little more light to enter. And light is dangerous for people who have spent years hiding in darkness. The first major realization among investigators was unsettling. Many murders previously viewed as isolated events might actually be connected through a much smaller circle of individuals than originally believed. The implications were enormous. If true, it meant dozens of investigations might share common threads. It meant forgotten evidence might suddenly become relevant again. It meant names previously considered unimportant could take on entirely new significance. Law enforcement agencies began revisiting older files. Photographs were re-examined. Witness statements were reviewed. Timelines were reconstructed. What had once appeared random started looking organized. Very organized. The victims varied. The locations varied. But the methods often reflected professional planning. That observation generated a disturbing possibility. Perhaps one individual, or a very small group of individuals, had been responsible for multiple killings. Investigators had seen similar situations before. Professional criminals often develop recognizable habits, certain preferences, certain operational patterns. No two murders are identical. Yet experienced detectives learn to recognize recurring signatures hidden beneath the surface. Not emotional signatures, practical ones. The choice of location, the timing, the approach, the escape strategy, the level of preparation. These details can reveal far more than dramatic forensic evidence. And in case after case, investigators began seeing traces of extraordinary preparation. Someone was doing homework. Someone was studying targets. Someone was minimizing risk. That realization narrowed possibilities considerably. Because not every criminal possesses that level of discipline. In fact, very few do. Most violent offenders eventually make mistakes. They act emotionally. They panic. They brag. They attract attention. Professional killers are different. Their greatest weapon is often self-control. And Gallant possessed self-control in abundance. Those who later studied his crimes repeatedly encountered the same theme. Patience. Patience before the attack. Patience after the attack. Patience during investigations. Patience during years of silence. Imagine carrying knowledge of dozens of murders while continuing daily life. Imagine hearing news reports, seeing police appeals for information, watching families beg for answers, and saying nothing. Not for months, not for years, for decades. That level of compartmentalization is difficult to comprehend. Yet it became central to understanding Gallant. He appeared capable of separating his criminal life from everything else. The murders occupied one compartment. Ordinary existence occupied another. The compartments rarely touched, at least outwardly. Eventually, however, investigators discovered something crucial. No matter how careful someone becomes, the past remains dangerous. Every crime creates a trail. Some trails are obvious. Others remain hidden for years. But they exist. Waiting. The challenge lies in finding them. As authorities intensified efforts against organized crime, attention increasingly focused on individuals who had long operated in the shadows. People once considered peripheral suddenly became important. Relationships previously overlooked gained significance. Connections emerged. Patterns strengthened. And somewhere within that expanding web of information stood Gerald Gallant. At first, his name did not carry the weight it eventually would. He was simply another figure connected to the criminal world. Another person with ties to dangerous networks. Another potential lead. But every investigation begins somewhere. Sometimes a single name becomes the thread that unravels everything. The closer detectives looked, the more intriguing that thread became. Questions multiplied. Associations surfaced. Old information acquired new meaning. The picture remained incomplete. Yet investigators sensed they were approaching something significant. What they did not yet realize was just how significant. Because the truth waiting behind Gallant's silence exceeded nearly everyone's expectations. Few detectives expected one man to possess answers to so many unsolved murders. Few imagined the scale. Few imagined the body count. And certainly few imagined that the eventual breakthrough would come not from a crime scene, but from the killer himself. The archives still held their secrets. The files remained open. The families remained waiting. But the foundation was shifting. Years of buried violence were beginning to rise toward the surface. The discovery phase had begun. Investigators simply did not know it yet. Soon, one arrest would trigger a chain reaction. One decision would reopen decades of bloodshed. One confession would transform forgotten cold cases into solved murders. And when that moment arrived, detectives across Canada would find themselves confronting a chilling reality. The answers had been alive all along. Walking freely. Remembering everything. Waiting for the day he finally decided to talk. Part 6. The Investigation. Every long-running criminal career eventually reaches a moment when luck begins to run out. Not all at once. Not with flashing lights and dramatic arrests. Sometimes it happens quietly. A witness decides to talk. A detective notices a detail that others overlooked. A criminal associate gets arrested and suddenly finds religion, fear, or self-preservation. The machine that once protected a killer begins to break apart one gear at a time. For Gerald Gallant, that moment arrived after decades of living in the shadows. By then, countless investigations across eastern Canada had stalled. Murder files sat in archives. Photographs yellowed with age. Evidence boxes collected dust. Families of victims learned to live with uncertainty. Many detectives who originally worked the cases had retired. Some had died. Others carried lingering frustration from murders they never solved. The killers seemed gone. The truth seemed buried. Then the past began fighting its way back to the surface. Organized crime investigations rarely move in straight lines. Detectives may spend years chasing drug traffickers only to uncover a homicide. They may investigate a robbery and discover links to extortion. They may arrest one suspect and suddenly gain access to an entire criminal network. Every piece of information matters because nobody knows which thread will eventually unravel the entire tapestry. By the early 2000s, law enforcement agencies throughout Atlantic Canada were increasing pressure on organized crime groups. Drug operations expanded. Surveillance intensified. Informants became more valuable than ever. Investigators understood that criminal organizations survive through secrecy. Break the secrecy, and the organization becomes vulnerable. Break enough secrecy, and entire networks collapse. Somewhere within that pressure campaign, Gallant found himself in a position he had spent decades avoiding. He was vulnerable. The years had changed the landscape around him. Associates who once remained silent were aging. Old loyalties were weakening. The criminal underworld itself was evolving. Younger offenders replaced older ones. New groups emerged. Old alliances disappeared. The world Gallant once navigated with confidence no longer looked quite the same. And law enforcement had become more sophisticated. Technology improved. Information sharing improved. Databases connected agencies that once operated largely independently. What remained hidden in one province could suddenly become visible in another. The walls protecting old secrets were becoming thinner. Then came the event that changed everything. In 2003, Gallant was arrested in connection with a murder investigation. For most people, arrest represents the beginning of fear. For professional criminals, it represents calculation. Every decision suddenly matters. Every word carries consequences. Every possible outcome must be weighed carefully. Gallant now faced a reality he had successfully avoided for decades. The possibility that he might spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Investigators recognized the opportunity immediately. Experienced detectives understand that pressure creates leverage. The greater the pressure, the more valuable cooperation becomes. A suspect facing overwhelming consequences may begin viewing silence differently. The question was simple. Would Gallant talk? At first, nobody knew. Career criminals often pride themselves on maintaining loyalty. Some view cooperation as the ultimate betrayal. Others insist they will never provide information regardless of consequences. But reality often proves more complicated than criminal mythology. Prison has a way of forcing difficult calculations. Age has a way of changing priorities. Fear has a way of reshaping convictions. And Gallant began calculating. Investigators sat across from a man who carried decades of secrets. At that stage, they still did not know exactly how many. They suspected involvement in serious crimes. They suspected organized crime connections. They suspected violence. What they did not fully understand was the sheer scale of what remained hidden behind his silence. Then the conversations began. Initially, detectives approached the interviews cautiously. They had encountered liars before. Manipulators. Exaggerators. Criminals eager to trade stories for favorable treatment. Every claim required verification. Every detail required scrutiny. Trust was not automatic. Trust had to be earned. As Gallant started talking, investigators listened carefully. Names emerged. Dates emerged. Locations emerged. The information sounded significant. Very significant. But detectives remained skeptical. Anyone can tell a story. The challenge lies in proving whether that story is true. So investigators began checking details. One case. Then another. Then another. The results were startling. Gallant remembered things that only someone directly involved would likely know. Specific locations. Specific victims. Specific circumstances. Information buried deep inside old case files. Information never released publicly. The more detectives verified, the more alarming the situation became. This was not a man inventing stories. This was a man opening a door into decades of violence. Soon, interview rooms became something entirely different. They became portals into unsolved history. Investigators would place a file on the table. Gallant would study it. Then he would begin talking. Sometimes calmly. Sometimes matter-of-factly. Often with an emotional detachment that disturbed those listening. One detective later remarked that the most unsettling aspect was not necessarily the murders themselves. It was the way Gallant described them. There was no visible rage. No dramatic display of remorse. No emotional collapse. Just facts. Names. Assignments. Payments. Results. As if he were discussing business transactions rather than human lives. The contrast was chilling. Across the table sat detectives who had spent years trying to bring justice to grieving families. Across from them sat a man discussing homicide with the emotional intensity of someone reviewing work records. That emotional disconnect revealed something important. Gallant did not appear to view his murders the way ordinary people would. The killings were compartmentalized. Separated from morality. Separated from empathy. Separated from the suffering left behind. For him, many victims had become tasks. And tasks, once completed, were filed away inside memory. Investigators found themselves reopening cold cases at an astonishing pace. Cases that had baffled police for years suddenly gained clarity. Victims once believed to have been killed by unknown assailants now had explanations. Motives emerged. Connections emerged. Entire investigative theories changed. Each confession created new work. Detectives traveled. Files were retrieved. Evidence was reviewed. Witness statements were re-examined. New truths emerged. The process consumed enormous resources. Yet nobody questioned its importance. Because every confession represented another family finally receiving answers. Even painful answers are often better than uncertainty. Many relatives had spent years imagining possibilities, wondering who killed their loved one, wondering why, wondering whether justice would ever arrive. Now, for the first time, some of those questions had responses. The answers were horrifying, but they were answers. As the investigation expanded, the scale of Gallant's admissions stunned law enforcement. 28 murders. 28. The number seemed almost impossible. Canada had seen notorious killers before. Serial predators, mass murderers, violent gangsters. But professional contract killers admitting involvement in nearly 30 homicides remained extraordinarily rare. The number transformed Gallant from a suspect into something else entirely. A historical figure within Canadian criminal investigations. A man whose actions stretched across decades. A man whose crimes touched multiple jurisdictions. A man who had quietly accumulated one of the highest confirmed body counts among contract killers in Canadian history. Detectives who initially viewed him as a single homicide suspect suddenly found themselves confronting an entire era of organized crime violence. The investigation became larger than one murder, larger than one province, larger than one courtroom. Every new admission forced authorities to ask difficult questions. How had he remained undetected for so long? How many warning signs had been missed? How many opportunities had existed to stop him earlier? The answers were rarely simple. Many victims belonged to criminal circles. Witnesses stayed silent. Evidence was limited. Geography complicated investigations. Technology lagged behind modern capabilities. The conditions had created the perfect environment for a professional killer to operate. And Gallant had exploited those conditions masterfully. Yet even masterful criminals eventually encounter limits. Time itself became one of Gallant's greatest enemies, because every year increased the possibility that old secrets might surface. Every arrest created risk. Every associate represented potential exposure. No criminal remains untouchable forever. The investigation proved that truth can move slowly, painfully slowly. But truth possesses remarkable persistence. It waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Then suddenly it appears. As interview after interview unfolded, investigators realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not merely the solving of individual murders. They were watching the reconstruction of an entire hidden history. A history written in blood. A history concealed beneath fear and silence. A history that one man had carried inside his memory for decades. And as more confessions emerged, one reality became impossible to ignore. The investigation was no longer focused on proving whether Gerald Gallant had killed. That question had effectively been answered. The new challenge was understanding the full extent of what he had done. Because behind every confession stood another victim, another family, another grave. And investigators increasingly suspected that the final total might be even more disturbing than anyone had first imagined. Part 7. The Breakthrough. For decades, the murders existed as fragments. A body discovered in one province. A shooting investigated in another. A grieving family waiting in a different town hundreds of kilometers away. The pieces were scattered across time and geography like pages torn from a book. Detectives worked hard. Families searched for answers. But the complete story remained hidden. Then the breakthrough arrived. Not through a fingerprint. Not through DNA. Not through surveillance footage. The breakthrough came from the one person who knew where all the pieces belonged. Gerald Gallant himself. Every major criminal investigation has a moment when uncertainty begins transforming into certainty. The fog starts to lift. Questions begin receiving answers. Loose threads suddenly connect. What investigators experienced during Gallant's cooperation was not a single breakthrough. It was a cascade. One confession triggered another. One solved murder opened the door to several more. One forgotten case suddenly became connected to crimes occurring years apart. The process resembled watching dominoes fall. Slowly at first. Then faster. Then impossibly fast. Detectives who had spent entire careers chasing isolated mysteries suddenly found themselves staring at a map filled with connections. Names connected to locations. Locations connected to dates. Dates connected to victims. Victims connected to contracts. Contracts connected to criminal organizations. The hidden architecture of organized violence began revealing itself. And it was far larger than many investigators had anticipated. As interviews continued, Gallant described assignments from years earlier with unsettling clarity. Certain details remained vivid in his memory. A parking lot, a street corner, a restaurant, a license plate, a route used to escape, the amount of money promised, the amount actually paid. Many investigators found this deeply disturbing. Human memory usually fades. Faces blur. Specific days become difficult to recall. Yet Gallant often remembered details connected to murders committed years or even decades earlier. Not because the victims mattered to him, but because the jobs mattered. To him, these assignments had been professional tasks. And professionals tend to remember important jobs. That realization painted a chilling picture. While families spent decades mourning loved ones, Gallant carried the answers all along. The truth had not disappeared. It had simply remained locked inside the mind of a man who chose not to share it. Until now. One by one, investigators began verifying the information he provided. The process required extraordinary caution. Confessions alone are not enough. Every statement had to be tested against evidence. Every claim needed confirmation. Detectives revisited old files. Photographs were re-examined. Witness interviews were reviewed. Forensic reports were compared against Gallant's recollections. Again and again, the details matched. The consistency strengthened his credibility. And the stronger that credibility became, the larger the implications grew. Soon investigators realized they were no longer dealing with a suspect seeking attention. They were dealing with a witness to his own criminal history. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the breakthrough was the sheer number of cold cases suddenly receiving new life. Some files had remained dormant for years. Detectives assigned to them had moved on. Families had learned to expect nothing. Many had accepted the possibility that justice would never arrive. Then a phone call would come. A meeting would be scheduled. A detective would knock on a door. And families would hear words they never expected to hear. We know what happened. We know who was responsible. For some relatives, those moments brought relief. For others, they brought fresh pain. The answers were often horrific. Yet uncertainty can be its own form of torture. Many families described years spent imagining endless possibilities. Was their loved one targeted? Was it random? Did the victim suffer? Was justice even possible? The breakthrough provided answers to questions that had haunted people for decades. But it also revealed uncomfortable truths. Many victims had been selected long before they ever realized danger existed. Gallant's admissions showed how methodical contract killings could be. These were rarely spontaneous acts. They involved planning, observation, preparation, patience. Some targets had been watched extensively before their deaths. Their routines became predictable. Their vulnerabilities became visible. The eventual attack often lasted mere seconds. Yet those seconds were preceded by days or weeks of preparation. This understanding fundamentally changed how investigators viewed many of the murders. What once appeared mysterious now seemed calculated. What once appeared random now appeared deliberate. The breakthrough exposed not only the killer, but also the system that allowed him to operate. Organized crime thrives on secrecy. Orders pass through layers. Responsibilities become fragmented. Money moves quietly. Violence is outsourced. The person requesting a murder often remains distant from the person carrying it out. That distance protects everyone involved. Or at least it is supposed to. Gallant's cooperation disrupted that protection. Every confession created new investigative opportunities. Every revelation illuminated another hidden relationship. Detectives suddenly gained insight into criminal structures that had remained largely invisible. The information extended beyond murder. It revealed rivalries, financial disputes, drug trafficking networks, power struggles. The killings were no longer isolated events. They became chapters in a much larger story. A story involving organized crime across multiple provinces. The breakthrough also forced investigators to confront an unsettling question. How many other murders remained unsolved because the right person had never talked? The answer was impossible to calculate. But Gallant's case demonstrated how fragile criminal secrecy can become when a key participant decides cooperation serves his interests. And cooperation certainly served Gallant's interests. He understood the reality facing him. Without cooperation, he risked dying in prison with little leverage. With cooperation, he possessed something valuable. Information. Extensive information. Information prosecutors desperately wanted. Information detectives desperately needed. Information families had waited years to hear. The negotiations surrounding that information became one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. Many observers struggled with the idea that someone connected to 28 murders could receive benefits for helping authorities. The emotional reaction was understandable. After all, every confession represented a human life lost. Every solved case carried a grieving family behind it. Yet investigators viewed the situation through a different lens. Without Gallant's cooperation, many of those murders might have remained unsolved forever. The breakthrough depended on access to knowledge only he possessed. That reality created an uncomfortable balance between justice and practicality. Some accepted it. Others never did. Regardless of opinion, the impact of the breakthrough was undeniable. Dozens of investigations moved forward. Cold cases reopened. Victims received names for their killers. The historical record changed. Perhaps most importantly, Gallant's confessions shattered the myth of the invisible hitman. For years he had appeared untouchable. A ghost moving through the criminal world. A man capable of killing and disappearing without consequence. The breakthrough proved otherwise. No criminal remains invisible forever. Time eventually exposes weaknesses. Circumstances eventually change. The same patience that allowed Gallant to survive for decades could not stop the passage of time. And time finally caught him. Investigators who participated in the interviews later described a strange atmosphere. On one side of the table sat detectives trying to solve murders. On the other sat a man calmly describing crimes that had shaped entire lives. The contrast was impossible to ignore. For investigators, each victim represented a person, a family, a tragedy. For Gallant, many victims seemed reduced to assignments remembered through practical details. That emotional distance remained one of the most disturbing elements of the entire story. Not rage, not cruelty, distance, a cold separation between action and consequence. As the breakthrough continued unfolding, media attention increased. The public learned more about Gallant's admissions, more about the scale of violence, more about the decades-long span of his activities. People struggled to understand how one man could participate in so many murders while remaining largely unknown outside criminal circles. Yet that anonymity had been his greatest weapon. Famous killers attract scrutiny. Invisible killers do not. For years, Gallant existed in that invisible space. The breakthrough destroyed it. By the time investigators completed their work, the picture had become clear. The scattered fragments were no longer scattered. The puzzle was no longer incomplete. The hidden connections had emerged. The victims finally shared a common thread. A single name. A single man. A single career built upon death. And although many difficult legal battles still remained ahead, one fact was now undeniable. The era of mystery had ended. The era of accountability was about to begin. For the families who had waited so long, justice was still imperfect. Nothing could return those who had been murdered. Nothing could erase years of grief. But for the first time in decades, the truth was no longer hiding. The truth had finally stepped into the light. And once revealed, it could never be buried again. Part 8. Justice. Justice is often imagined as a moment. A verdict. A sentence. A judge striking a gavel. A courtroom rising to its feet. But for families touched by murder, justice is rarely that simple. It does not erase grief. It does not reverse time. It does not bring victims back home. At best, justice offers acknowledgement. A public recognition that a crime occurred. A declaration that the lives taken mattered. A confirmation that truth has finally overcome silence. For the families connected to Gerald Gallant's victims, reaching that point took decades. Some had spent years wondering whether anyone would ever be held responsible. Others had watched investigations stall repeatedly. Many had grown accustomed to disappointment. Then the confessions arrived. And with them came a new challenge. How should a legal system handle a man who admitted involvement in 28 murders? The question was far more complicated than it appeared. From a public perspective, the answer seemed obvious. A man responsible for that many deaths should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Many Canadians felt exactly that way. Many families felt even stronger. To them, every murder represented a world destroyed. Parents lost children. Children lost fathers. Brothers lost sisters. Friends lost lifelong companions. The pain stretched across decades. How could any sentence possibly balance such devastation? Yet prosecutors faced a different reality. Without Gallant's cooperation, many murders might never have been solved. Without his testimony, countless families might never have learned what happened. Without his admissions, important criminal networks might have remained hidden. The legal system found itself caught between two competing goals: punishment and truth. Both mattered. Both carried weight. And achieving one sometimes required compromise with the other. That compromise generated enormous controversy. As details emerged regarding Gallant's cooperation, public debate intensified. Newspapers covered the story extensively. Television reports revisited cold cases. Commentators questioned whether authorities had offered too much in exchange for information. Families expressed frustration. Some expressed anger. Others simply expressed exhaustion. Many had spent years waiting for justice. Now they were being told that justice would arrive in a form far different from what they had imagined. Courtrooms became places where decades of violence finally received public examination. The hidden history of organized crime killings was dragged into daylight. Names once whispered in criminal circles entered official records. Victims previously known only through cold case files became central figures in legal proceedings. For investigators, these moments represented validation. Years of work were finally producing results. For prosecutors, they represented opportunity. A chance to secure accountability. For families, the experience was often more complicated. Court proceedings force people to revisit trauma. Old wounds reopen. Painful memories return. Questions once buried rise again. Many relatives entered courtrooms carrying photographs. Some carried decades of grief. Others carried hope. Hope that the legal process would finally acknowledge what had been taken from them. Gallant himself remained a figure of intense fascination. Observers studied his demeanor closely. How does a man sit in court after admitting involvement in 28 murders? Does he appear haunted? Regretful? Broken? The descriptions often suggested something different. A calmness. A detachment. The same emotional distance investigators had noticed during interviews. That detachment unsettled many people. Human beings naturally expect emotional reactions when discussing death, particularly death on such a scale. Yet Gallant often appeared remarkably composed. For some observers, that composure seemed more disturbing than anger would have been, because anger can be understood. Detachment is harder to explain. The legal proceedings also highlighted the extraordinary scope of his criminal career. Most murder trials focus on a single victim. Perhaps two, occasionally several. Gallant's case forced courts to confront decades of violence spanning multiple provinces and numerous victims. The scale alone made the proceedings historically significant. Each confession carried legal consequences. Each solved murder added another layer to the case. Each victim represented another reminder of the damage left behind. And behind every victim stood real people. Families listening. Families remembering. Families mourning. The public often focuses on killers during major criminal cases. Their faces appear in newspapers. Their names dominate headlines. But the courtroom moments that mattered most belonged to the victims. The individuals whose lives had ended suddenly. The families who endured years of uncertainty. The loved ones who never stopped asking questions. Those people formed the emotional center of the proceedings. As testimony unfolded, the reality of contract killing became impossible to ignore. Many victims had never personally known Gallant. They had never argued with him, never threatened him, never harmed him. Some had simply become targets because someone else wanted them eliminated. That reality disturbed jurors, observers, and investigators alike. The randomness felt cold, mechanical. A human life reduced to a transaction. A contract. A payment. An assignment completed. The legal process transformed those abstract realities into documented facts. Official records. Official findings. Official accountability. No longer rumors. No longer suspicions. Facts. The significance of that transformation cannot be overstated. For years, many murders existed within uncertainty. Now they existed within history. Established. Verified. Recorded. The courts had spoken. Yet even successful prosecutions could not silence criticism. Many relatives believed Gallant benefited too much from cooperation agreements. They understood the practical reasons. They simply struggled emotionally with the outcome. Their frustration was understandable. Imagine losing a loved one. Imagine waiting years for answers. Then imagine learning the killer helped authorities and therefore avoided some consequences that might otherwise have occurred. For many families, that reality felt deeply unfair. Justice, after all, is not merely legal. It is emotional. And emotional justice often demands more than legal systems can provide. Prosecutors acknowledged these concerns. Investigators acknowledged them as well. Yet they also recognized another truth. Without cooperation, many families might never have learned anything at all. The compromise remained painful, but it produced answers. And answers possess value, particularly after decades of silence. As the proceedings concluded, Gallant received a life sentence. The sentence ensured that his freedom would be severely restricted. The courts had formally recognized the gravity of his actions. The legal system had delivered its judgment. For some observers, the outcome represented success. A prolific contract killer had been exposed. Dozens of murders had been solved. Organized crime networks had been weakened. The truth had emerged. For others, the outcome felt incomplete. How could any sentence adequately address 28 murders? How could any punishment equal the suffering inflicted upon so many families? Those questions lingered. Perhaps they always will. Because certain crimes challenge the very concept of proportional justice. No sentence can restore a lost life. No prison term can erase decades of grief. The courtroom can establish facts. It can assign responsibility. It can impose punishment. But it cannot heal every wound. As Gallant's legal battles drew toward their conclusion, one fact became undeniable. The era of impunity was over. The man who had spent decades moving through shadows now stood fully exposed. His crimes were known. His victims were known. His history was known. The legal system had done what it could. The courts had rendered judgment. The investigations had reached their destination. Yet beyond the verdicts and sentences, another legacy remained. A legacy measured not in legal documents, but in lives. Lives interrupted. Lives destroyed. Lives remembered. Because the true significance of justice is not found in what happens to the killer. It is found in whether society remembers the victims, whether their stories survive, whether their names matter. And as the courtroom doors finally closed on one of Canada's most notorious contract killers, that responsibility passed to everyone else. The responsibility to remember. The responsibility to acknowledge. The responsibility to ensure that those 28 lives were never reduced to statistics. Because behind every solved case stood a human being. And behind every human being stood a story that deserved to be told. Part 9, The Aftermath. Long after the courtrooms emptied, long after the headlines faded from newspaper front pages, long after investigators closed the last folders connected to Gerald Gallant, the consequences of his actions remained. Murder does not end when a trigger is pulled. It echoes. It moves through years. It settles into families. It changes futures. It leaves empty chairs at dinner tables. It creates birthdays that are never celebrated. It transforms ordinary memories into priceless treasures. For the families of Gallant's victims, life continued. But it continued differently. Some parents grew old carrying photographs of children who never came home. Some wives learned how to navigate decades without the men they once expected to grow old beside. Some children reached adulthood, knowing their fathers only through stories told by relatives. The murders had happened years earlier, yet their impact remained present. Invisible, persistent, permanent. That is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding people have about contract killing. The public often imagines it as efficient violence. A quick crime, a quick death, a quick disappearance. But nothing about murder is quick for the people left behind. The victim dies in a moment. The family lives with it forever. Many of Gallant's victims had existed on the margins of public sympathy. Some were involved in organized crime. Some had criminal histories. Some lived dangerous lives. Because of that, their deaths were sometimes viewed differently by society. As if their choices somehow reduced the tragedy. As if their families hurt less. As if their children cried less. As if their parents grieved less. But grief does not care about criminal records. A mother mourns her son regardless of his mistakes. A daughter misses her father regardless of what he may have done. Loss remains loss, and pain remains pain. One of the most important lessons from the Gallant case is that every victim belonged to a much larger circle of people. Behind every murder stood a network of human connections. Friends, parents, brothers, sisters, children, spouses. Each killing created ripples extending far beyond the immediate target. Those ripples continued spreading long after Gallant moved on to his next assignment. The case also forced Canadians to confront uncomfortable realities about organized crime. For years, many people viewed biker wars, drug conflicts, and criminal feuds as distant problems affecting only criminals themselves. The truth was far more complicated. Organized crime does not exist in isolation. Its violence reaches communities. Its fear reaches witnesses. Its influence reaches businesses. Its consequences reach innocent families. The murders connected to Gallant exposed just how deeply criminal organizations had embedded themselves into parts of Canadian society during those decades. The public learned that professional killers were not fictional characters confined to movies. They existed. They worked quietly. They planned carefully. And for years they sometimes succeeded in avoiding detection. That realization changed how many investigators approached organized crime cases afterward. The Gallant investigations became a lesson in patience, a lesson in persistence, a lesson in never abandoning a case simply because answers seem impossible to find. Some detectives spent years chasing fragments of evidence that appeared meaningless at the time. Only later did those fragments become important. Only later did they connect to a larger picture. The case demonstrated that truth can remain hidden for a very long time. But hidden does not mean lost. The revelations also sparked broader discussions within law enforcement circles. How many cold cases remain unsolved because key participants have never spoken? How many investigations still contain missing pieces waiting to be discovered? How should authorities balance punishment with cooperation when dealing with major offenders? These questions continue to influence criminal investigations today. Yet beyond the legal debates and investigative lessons lies a more personal story. A story about human nature. Because Gallant's life forces us to ask difficult questions. How does a person become capable of treating murder as employment? How does someone separate human life from personal profit so completely? What happens inside a person's mind when killing becomes routine? The answers are not simple. Some researchers point to environment. Others point to personality. Others point to years spent immersed in criminal culture where violence becomes normalized. Perhaps all of those factors played a role. But what remains most striking is the emotional distance Gallant displayed. Many killers act from rage. Others act from obsession. Others act from desperation. Gallant often appeared motivated by practicality. The murders were assignments, tasks, jobs. That absence of visible emotion disturbed investigators more than open hatred might have. Because hatred at least acknowledges another person's existence. Indifference erases it. And perhaps that is what made him such an effective hitman for so many years. He learned to see people as objectives rather than human beings. Targets rather than lives. Problems rather than individuals. The transformation was chilling. And the consequences were deadly. When Gallant eventually died in 2008 from cancer, reactions varied widely. Some people barely noticed. Others reflected on the extraordinary criminal history that had finally come to an end. Many families likely experienced mixed emotions. His death closed one chapter, but it could never close all chapters. Because closure itself is often misunderstood. People speak of closure as if it is a destination, a final moment when pain disappears. Real life rarely works that way. Families do not stop missing loved ones because a killer is convicted. They do not stop grieving because investigations end. The loss remains. What changes is the uncertainty. Questions are answered. Truth is established. Mysteries are resolved. And while those things matter deeply, they do not erase sorrow. The Gallant case also serves as a warning. A warning about what happens when violence becomes transactional. When human lives are assigned monetary value. When greed outweighs empathy. When loyalty to criminal organizations replaces loyalty to basic human morality. History is filled with individuals who committed terrible acts in pursuit of power, money, or status. Gallant occupies a unique place among them because of the sheer scale of his admissions. 28 confirmed murders. Possibly more. An entire career measured not through accomplishments, but through funerals. Not through achievements, but through graves. Not through creation, but through destruction. And yet, despite everything, the story ultimately belongs not to him. It belongs to the victims. It belongs to the families who endured decades of uncertainty. It belongs to investigators who refused to stop searching for answers. It belongs to communities forced to confront difficult truths about organized crime. Those are the people whose legacy deserves attention. Not the man who pulled the trigger, but the people whose lives were interrupted by it. As the years pass, memories fade. Witnesses grow older. Documents gather dust. Names slowly disappear from public conversation. That is why stories like this matter. Because remembering is a form of justice. Remembering prevents victims from becoming statistics. Remembering restores humanity to people often reduced to case numbers. Remembering reminds us that every murder represents an entire universe lost. A future erased. A family forever changed. Today, when criminologists study professional killers, the name Gerald Gallant still appears. His case remains one of the most significant examples of contract murder in Canadian history. Students analyze it. Researchers discuss it. Investigators learn from it. But beyond the academic interest and historical significance lies a simpler truth. 28 people lost their lives. 28 families lost someone they loved. And no amount of analysis should ever allow us to forget that reality. The final lesson of the Gallant story may be the most important one. Evil does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrives quietly, patiently, methodically. Sometimes it wears an ordinary face, lives in ordinary neighborhoods, drives ordinary roads, and sometimes it hides successfully for years. But eventually the truth emerges. Eventually the secrets break apart. Eventually the shadows retreat. Gerald Gallant spent decades operating in darkness. His victims spent decades waiting for answers. In the end, the answers came. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to reveal the truth. Enough to expose the man behind the murders. Enough to ensure that history would remember what happened. And perhaps that is where this story truly ends. Not with the killer. Not with the confessions. Not with the courtroom. But with remembrance. Because while killers often seek power over life and death, they do not control memory. And as long as the victims are remembered, as long as their stories continue to be told, they remain more than names in old files. They remain human beings. And that is something no killer can ever take away. Part 10. The Legacy of the Shadows. Years after the investigations ended, after the court documents were archived and the headlines disappeared from public attention, the story of Gerald Gallant continued to cast a long shadow across eastern Canada. The roads remained the same. The neighborhoods remained the same. The small towns along the Atlantic coast still woke each morning beneath the same gray skies and salty ocean winds. People drove to work. Children went to school. Fishing boats left harbor before sunrise. Life moved forward. Yet hidden beneath that ordinary rhythm was the knowledge that for decades a man had traveled those same roads carrying deadly intentions. He had stood in parking lots. He had watched houses from a distance. He had waited patiently in cars parked beneath streetlights. He had blended into crowds. And nobody knew. That realization continued to haunt investigators long after the case was closed. Many of the detectives who worked on Gallant's confessions later admitted that the case changed the way they viewed organized crime forever. Before Gallant, contract killers often seemed almost mythical. They existed in movies, in novels, in rumors whispered through criminal circles. But Gallant proved something far more disturbing. Professional killers were real. They could operate for decades. They could appear completely ordinary. And they could hide behind the silence created by fear. The fear was perhaps one of the strongest weapons organized crime possessed. Witnesses feared retaliation. Associates feared punishment. Families feared speaking publicly. Entire communities sometimes learned to look away. Not because they approved of violence, but because survival often felt safer than confrontation. Gallant thrived inside that environment. Every unsolved murder created more uncertainty. Every frightened witness created another layer of protection. Every unanswered question bought him more time. For years, the system worked exactly as intended. Until it didn't. One of the lasting impacts of the case was the renewed focus on cold case investigations throughout Canada. Detectives began reviewing old files with fresh eyes. Advances in forensic science created new opportunities. Databases improved. Communication between agencies became stronger. Investigators increasingly understood that even decades-old cases could still be solved. The Gallant confessions became proof. A murder does not stop mattering simply because time has passed. A victim does not become less important because years have gone by. And a killer does not become innocent simply because he managed to avoid detection. Time changes many things, but it does not change the truth. The families of victims understood this better than anyone. Many of them spent years living between hope and despair. Hope that answers would eventually come. Despair that they never would. When the confessions finally arrived, emotions often collided. There was relief. Relief that the uncertainty was over. Relief that suspicions had finally been confirmed. Relief that someone had finally admitted what happened. But relief was rarely the only emotion. There was anger as well. Anger over lost years. Anger over missed opportunities. Anger over the realization that the person responsible had continued living his life while families suffered in silence. Some relatives described the experience as reopening a wound they had spent decades trying to survive. Others viewed it as the first genuine step toward healing. Every family carried its grief differently. Every victim left behind a unique story. That is something often forgotten when discussing serial offenders or contract killers. The public tends to focus on numbers. 28 murders. Dozens of victims. Years of violence. But numbers can create distance. They can make tragedy feel abstract. The reality was far more personal. 28 murders meant 28 individual lives. 28 birthdays never celebrated again. 28 families forced to receive devastating news. 28 futures erased. Every victim had favorite songs, favorite meals, people they loved, dreams they intended to pursue. The number alone cannot capture that loss. Perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate. Not because Gallant was extraordinary, but because the victims were ordinary. And ordinary lives matter. A father coaching his child. A son helping his parents. A friend sharing laughter over coffee. A husband planning for the future. Those small moments are what murder steals. Not merely life itself, but all the moments that would have followed. The Gallant case also revealed uncomfortable truths about the psychology of violence. When investigators listened to his confessions, many were struck by what seemed absent. There was no dramatic hatred, no grand ideology, no passionate speeches. Again and again they encountered something colder. Practicality, efficiency, detachment. Murder had become a task, a service, a transaction. That emotional emptiness disturbed many professionals more than rage ever could. Because rage eventually burns out. Detachment can last forever. The case became a subject of study among criminologists and behavioral experts. How does a person repeatedly kill strangers without developing visible remorse? How does violence become routine? How does a human being learn to view another person's death as merely part of a job? There are no simple answers. Human behavior is rarely simple. Yet Gallant's story became one of the clearest examples of how organized crime can transform violence into an industry. An industry where money replaces morality, where contracts replace conscience, where profit becomes more important than human life. The consequences extended far beyond individual murders. Communities suffered. Trust suffered. Families suffered. Even law enforcement agencies faced difficult questions. Could earlier intervention have prevented some deaths? Were opportunities missed? Could information have been shared more effectively? Those questions continue to influence investigative strategies today. Every major case leaves lessons behind. The Gallant investigation left many. Among the most important was the value of persistence. Some of the murders connected to him appeared unsolvable. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence deteriorated. Years passed. Yet investigators continued working. And eventually the truth emerged. That lesson remains powerful. Justice may move slowly, painfully slowly at times, but persistence matters. Another lesson involved cooperation between agencies. Gallant's crimes crossed provincial boundaries. Different jurisdictions possessed different pieces of information. Only when those pieces were assembled did the full picture emerge. Modern investigators increasingly recognize the importance of collaboration because of cases like this one. Criminals do not respect geographic boundaries. Investigations cannot afford to either. As years turned into decades, Gallant gradually became a historical figure within Canadian criminal history. Students studied the case. Authors wrote about it. Documentaries examined it. Researchers analyzed it. His name entered the archives of organized crime. Yet history has a strange habit. Over time, even notorious criminals begin fading into the background. New stories emerge. New crimes capture attention. New headlines dominate public conversation. Eventually, the killer becomes less important than the lessons left behind. That is where Gallant's story stands today. Not as a tale about one man, but as a warning about silence, a warning about organized crime, a warning about what happens when violence becomes normalized. Most importantly, it is a reminder that every unsolved case represents real people waiting for answers. Somewhere, a family still hopes. Somewhere, investigators still search. Somewhere, questions remain unanswered. The Gallant case proves that answers can arrive even after many years. Not always. Not perfectly. But sometimes. And sometimes is enough reason to keep trying. In the end, the story of Gerald Gallant is not truly about a hitman. It is about consequences. The consequences of greed. The consequences of violence. The consequences of treating human beings as obstacles rather than lives. His victims deserved futures. Their families deserved peace. Many never received either. But they did receive something important. The truth. And truth possesses a power that violence never will. Violence creates fear. Truth destroys fear. Violence hides in darkness. Truth brings light. Violence attempts to erase. Truth remembers. That is why this story continues to matter. Not because of the killer. Not because of the crimes. But because remembering the truth is one of the few ways society can honor those who were taken from it. Long after the gunshots faded. Long after the investigations ended. Long after the killer himself was gone. The truth remained. And sometimes, in cases like this, that is the most important victory of all. Part 11. Inside the mind of a professional killer. Most people spend their lives trying to understand how to build something. A career. A family. A home. A future. Gerald Gallant spent much of his adult life mastering the opposite skill. He learned how to end things. End conversations before they became threats. End rivalries before they escalated. End lives before dawn. The question that haunted investigators, psychologists, journalists, and ordinary Canadians alike was deceptively simple. Who was Gerald Gallant when he was not killing? The answer proved far more disturbing than many expected. Because monsters are easier to understand when they look like monsters. When evil appears obvious, society feels safer. People can point to it, identify it, avoid it. But Gallant did not fit that image. He was not known for explosive outbursts. He was not infamous for unpredictable behavior. He did not attract attention through chaos. Instead, he appeared remarkably ordinary. And that ordinary appearance became one of his greatest advantages. Witnesses later struggled to describe him because there seemed to be so little to describe. He blended in. He disappeared into crowds. He became another face at a gas station, another customer in a restaurant, another man standing quietly in a parking lot. The ability to avoid attention is a valuable skill for any criminal. For a contract killer, it can be the difference between freedom and prison. Gallant understood that instinctively. Everything about his methods suggested patience. He was not chasing excitement. He was not seeking fame. He was pursuing efficiency. That distinction matters. Many notorious killers are driven by compulsion. They crave recognition. They leave signatures. They communicate with authorities. They want the world to know what they have done. Gallant appeared different. The ideal murder, in his eyes, seemed to be one that nobody connected to him. No headlines. No spotlight. No attention. Just payment. Then disappearance. Again and again. That mindset fascinated behavioral experts. Because it suggested an extraordinary level of emotional compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is a psychological process through which people separate parts of their lives from one another. Most people do it to some degree. A doctor leaves work stress at the hospital. A teacher separates professional responsibilities from family life. A police officer learns to manage traumatic experiences. But Gallant appeared to have taken that ability to an extreme. Somehow, he separated murder from everything else. The act itself became isolated from emotion, isolated from empathy, isolated from morality. A target became a task. A death became a transaction. The victim ceased to be a human being. The victim became an objective. That transformation may explain how he managed to continue for so many years. Because genuine empathy creates obstacles. Empathy makes violence difficult. Empathy forces people to recognize suffering. Empathy reminds us that every stranger possesses a life as complex as our own. Gallant seemed capable of switching that awareness off. Or perhaps it had faded long before investigators ever met him. No one can say for certain. The human mind rarely reveals all its secrets. Yet certain clues emerged through the years. Those who studied his confessions often noticed the same pattern. He remembered details that benefited him. The amount of money involved. The route used to escape. The timing of a particular attack. The location of a meeting. But emotional details seemed largely absent. The victim's fears. The victim's family. The aftermath. Those aspects appeared far less important to him. It was as if his memory prioritized logistics while discarding humanity. That observation left many investigators deeply unsettled, because it suggested that violence had become normalized. Not exciting, not emotional, simply normal. And perhaps that is the most dangerous transformation any killer can experience. When murder stops feeling extraordinary, when it becomes routine. Routine allows repetition. Routine removes hesitation. Routine creates efficiency. The criminal underworld values efficiency. People who deliver results gain reputations. Reputations create opportunities. Opportunities create income. Over time, Gallant became known as someone capable of solving problems. That phrase appears frequently in organized crime. Solving problems. It sounds harmless, professional, almost respectable. But within criminal circles, the phrase often conceals something much darker. A problem might be a witness, a rival, a debtor, an informant, a former associate. And solving the problem may mean ensuring that person never speaks again. Gallant became associated with that role. Not because he was loud, not because he was feared publicly, but because he was effective. The criminal world often rewards effectiveness regardless of morality. Perhaps nowhere is that reality more visible than in contract murder. A killer who fails becomes a liability. A killer who succeeds becomes valuable. Gallant's longevity suggests he was considered valuable for a very long time. Yet success in the criminal world comes with hidden costs. Every murder creates risk. Every conspiracy creates vulnerability. Every secret requires protection. Over the years, Gallant accumulated dozens of secrets. Names, locations, dates, victims, employers, associates. The list grew longer and longer. Eventually, that burden becomes difficult to carry. Not necessarily because of guilt, sometimes because of survival. Criminal organizations are built upon loyalty. But loyalty inside such organizations is often conditional. People remain loyal while circumstances benefit them. When circumstances change, alliances shift. Friends become threats. Partners become witnesses. Protectors become targets. The same environment that once protected Gallant eventually became dangerous to him. And that danger likely influenced his decision to cooperate. By the time investigators began hearing his confessions, Gallant was no longer the invisible figure he once had been. Age changes people. Time changes circumstances. The criminal landscape itself had evolved. What once seemed permanent had become fragile. Faced with overwhelming legal pressure, Gallant made a decision. He talked. The confessions revealed another important aspect of his psychology. He was practical. Even during cooperation, practicality appeared to guide him. Not remorse. Not redemption. Practicality. He understood leverage. He understood negotiation. He understood value. Information possessed value. His information possessed enormous value. And he used it. This distinction remains important because society often searches for dramatic moments of transformation. A criminal finally sees the light. A killer suddenly experiences overwhelming guilt. A confession becomes a path toward redemption. Real life is often less dramatic. People make decisions for complicated reasons. Some cooperate because they regret what they have done. Others cooperate because cooperation benefits them. Gallant's motivations appeared rooted largely in self-interest. That assessment does not erase the importance of his confessions. The information still solved cases. Families still received answers. Justice still moved forward. But understanding motive matters, because motive reveals character. And Gallant's character appears remarkably consistent throughout his story. Cold, patient, practical, measured. The qualities that made him an effective hitman also shaped his interactions with investigators. Ironically, those same qualities may have contributed to his downfall. The more methodical a criminal becomes, the more evidence accumulates over time. Not physical evidence necessarily, but knowledge, connections, memories, relationships. Eventually those pieces form a pattern, and patterns can be exposed. That is exactly what happened. The man who spent decades eliminating witnesses ultimately became one of the most important witnesses against his own criminal history. There is a strange irony in that. For years, silence protected him. Then his own words dismantled the protection. Piece by piece, case by case, confession by confession. By the end, investigators possessed something they had lacked for decades. Insight, not only into the crimes themselves, but into the man responsible. Yet even after everything became public, Gallant remained difficult to fully understand. Perhaps that is inevitable. Some individuals leave behind answers. Others leave behind questions. Gallant left behind both. His crimes can be documented. His victims can be identified. His confessions can be studied. But the deepest question remains unresolved. How does a person reach a point where taking a life becomes just another day's work? Perhaps no report, no interview, and no confession can completely answer that question. Perhaps the darkness inside certain people cannot be measured or explained. All we can see are the consequences. And in Gallant's case, those consequences stretched across decades, provinces, and countless lives forever changed. The investigation exposed the crimes. The courts imposed punishment. History recorded the facts. Yet the mystery of the man himself remains partly hidden. A quiet figure moving through ordinary places. A man who looked unremarkable. A man who spent years turning death into a profession. And perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson of all. The most dangerous people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones nobody notices until it is far too late. Long after the courtroom lights were switched off and the reporters packed away their notebooks. Long after the stacks of evidence were sealed inside archives and the names of detectives slowly disappeared from public memory, the consequences of Gerald Gallant's crimes continued to move through the lives of countless people like invisible waves spreading across dark water. For many observers, the story appeared finished. The killer had confessed. The investigations had reached their conclusions. The courts had delivered judgment. The headlines had faded. Another chapter of Canadian criminal history had seemingly come to an end. But for the families of the dead, there was no clear ending. There never is. True crime stories often create the illusion that justice is the final chapter. A verdict is announced, a sentence is imposed, and the audience feels a sense of closure. Real life rarely works that way. Real grief does not end when a judge speaks. Real loss does not disappear because a killer finally admits what he has done. For some families, Gallant's confessions answered questions that had haunted them for decades. Questions that had lingered through birthdays, through holidays, through weddings, through funerals. Questions that had quietly followed them every day. What happened? Who did it? Why? For years many had lived with uncertainty. Uncertainty is a unique kind of suffering. A confirmed death is devastating, but uncertainty can become its own prison. A family cannot fully mourn when part of them still searches for answers. Every unexpected phone call creates hope. Every unfamiliar face sparks curiosity. Every rumor becomes a possibility. Years pass. Then more years pass. Yet the questions remain. When Gallant finally spoke, some of those questions disappeared. The answers were painful, but they were answers. And sometimes the truth, even an ugly truth, is easier to carry than endless uncertainty. Still, the truth did not bring happiness. It did not bring peace overnight. Many relatives described a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, exhaustion. The relief came from finally knowing. The anger came from understanding how long it had taken. The sadness came from realizing that nothing could change the past. The exhaustion came from carrying grief for so many years. Some family members admitted that they had imagined confronting the killer countless times. They imagined asking questions, demanding explanations, looking into the eyes of the man responsible. Yet when the opportunity finally arrived, many discovered something unexpected. There were no explanations capable of making sense of the loss. No answer could restore a father. No confession could return a son. No courtroom victory could bring back a brother. The dead remained dead, and that reality often felt heavier than anything else. Meanwhile, investigators who worked the case carried their own burdens. Police officers are trained to maintain professionalism. They are taught to focus on evidence, facts, procedure, logic. Yet beneath the uniforms are human beings. Human beings who spend years examining violence. Human beings who witness grief firsthand. Human beings who sometimes carry memories they never completely escape. For many detectives involved in the Gallant investigations, the case became one of those memories. Not simply because of the number of murders, but because of the scale of silence. Dozens of deaths, years of fear, entire communities affected, and a killer who moved through that landscape with remarkable patience. Some investigators later reflected on the frustration of knowing that many of the murders might never have been solved without Gallant's decision to cooperate. That reality highlighted both the strengths and limitations of criminal investigations. Police can gather evidence. They can interview witnesses. They can follow leads. But sometimes the missing piece exists only inside the mind of the person responsible. And when that person refuses to talk, the truth can remain hidden for decades. The Gallant case became an important lesson in the complexity of organized crime. Many people imagine organized crime as dramatic shootouts and high-speed chases. The reality is often quieter, more patient, more calculated. Violence exists, but it is usually hidden beneath layers of secrecy. The public sees only fragments. A body discovered in a parking lot. A shooting outside a residence. A suspicious disappearance. What remains invisible are the conversations that happened beforehand. The deals. The rivalries. The betrayals. The orders given behind closed doors. Gallant operated inside that invisible world. A world where human lives could be reduced to transactions. Where money determined value. Where loyalty could disappear overnight. His story exposed how deeply that culture had penetrated certain criminal networks during his era. For criminologists and historians, the case remains significant because it revealed the mechanics of professional violence. Many serial killers are driven by obsession, impulse, fantasy, psychological compulsion. Gallant represented something different. He demonstrated how murder could become occupational, how killing could evolve into a service provided for profit. That distinction remains deeply unsettling, because it suggests that extreme violence does not always emerge from madness. Sometimes it emerges from calculation. Sometimes it emerges from opportunity. Sometimes it emerges from ordinary human greed. Years after the case, researchers continued studying Gallant's confessions, not because they wished to glorify him, but because understanding offenders can help prevent future crimes. Patterns matter. Motivations matter. Methods matter. Every lesson learned has the potential to save lives later. Yet despite all the academic analysis, the most important lessons may be the simplest ones. Violence creates victims far beyond the immediate target. A murder affects parents, children, friends, co-workers, neighbors, entire communities. The ripple effects can last generations. Some children grow up without fathers. Some parents die never fully recovering from the loss of a son or daughter. Some families remain divided by grief for decades. The consequences extend far beyond a crime scene. Gallant's victims came from different backgrounds, different cities, different circumstances. Some were involved in criminal activity themselves. Others were caught within larger conflicts they did not fully control. But regardless of their histories, every death left a void, a space that could never be completely filled. That truth often becomes lost when discussions focus exclusively on offenders. The killer becomes famous. The victims become statistics. The Gallant case serves as a reminder to reverse that perspective. Because the true measure of a crime is not the notoriety of the offender. It is the suffering left behind. As the years passed, Gallant himself became less important. His name entered books, case studies, documentaries, historical records. But history has a way of shrinking even the most notorious figures. Eventually, public attention moves elsewhere. New crimes emerge. New investigations begin. New headlines dominate conversations. What remains are the lessons. And perhaps that is where the lasting significance of this story truly lies. The lesson that evil does not always announce itself. The lesson that patience can be as dangerous as aggression. The lesson that organized crime thrives when fear silences communities. The lesson that unresolved cases deserve continued attention, no matter how much time has passed. Most importantly, the lesson that every victim matters, even decades later, even when memories fade, even when witnesses disappear, even when hope grows thin. The search for truth still matters, because truth is more than evidence, more than testimony, more than court records. Truth is recognition. Recognition that a life existed. Recognition that a wrong occurred. Recognition that someone deserved better. That recognition is what many families fought for all those years. Not fame, not publicity, not revenge, simply acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that their loved ones mattered. In the end, Gerald Gallant left behind a legacy built on violence, fear, and death. Yet the people who endured the consequences left behind something stronger. Persistence, courage, determination. Families refused to stop asking questions. Investigators refused to stop searching for answers. Prosecutors refused to abandon cold cases. Together, those efforts eventually uncovered truths that many believed would remain buried forever. And perhaps that is the final message of this story. Darkness can hide the truth for years, sometimes for decades. But darkness is never guaranteed victory. Eventually, someone keeps digging. Someone keeps searching. Someone keeps asking questions. And sometimes, against all odds, the truth emerges. Not quickly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to honor the dead. Enough to expose the lies. Enough to remind future generations that every victim deserves to be remembered. The guns fell silent long ago. The contracts ended. The criminal alliances faded. But memory remains. And as long as memory remains, the victims are more than names in forgotten files. They are human beings whose stories continue to matter. That, more than anything else, is the legacy that survives after Gerald Gallant.